He was just a single dad, passing through a hospital corridor, when he heard a child's voice echoing from the far end. A girl no more than 10 was singing to a dying billionaire. What happened next would unravel secrets, awaken old wounds, and change the lives of everyone involved. Forever. Before we begin this incredible journey of music, memory, and redemption, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of quiet courage, unexpected kindness, and second chances to life. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to share it with someone who still believes in the power of doing good. The halls of Langston Memorial Hospital had a way of swallowing sound, the hum of fluorescent lights, the distant blip of heart monitors, the occasional shuffle of a nurse's sneakers on waxed linoleum. But on that particular night, at 2:14 a.m. to be exact, Hank Sullivan heard something that didn't belong. A voice. Not a nurse calling out codes or a doctor dictating notes. A child's voice. Singing. He froze in front of room 703, the private ICU suite where Walter Langston, once one of America's most powerful aviation magnates, lay comatose. Hank wasn't a nurse or a doctor, just a facilities tech. He fixed air vents, unclogged drains, replaced batteries in crash carts. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Predictable. Safe. And Hank liked safe. It didn't leave room for the kind of loss he'd once known. The voice came again, soft and trembling but clear. Somewhere over the rainbow. Skies are blue. Hank turned, slowly following the sound. The hallway was dim night shift lighting. He passed empty rooms, past the nurse's station where no one sat, past a janitor's cart with a dangling mop. The voice pulled him forward like a thread. Then he saw her. A small girl no older than 10, kneeling beside the bed in room 703. Walter Langston's room. She had messy brown hair and wore a faded dress 2 sizes too big. Her knees were pressed to the cold tile floor. Her hands rested gently on the old man's blanket, as if trying not to disturb him. Her voice quivered on the last line. And the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Hank didn't know what made his breath hitch more, the fragile beauty of her singing, or the green line on Walter's heart monitor suddenly jumping. She wasn't supposed to be here. No child should be wandering the ICU at this hour. And yet, he didn't move. Neither did she. The moment stretched, suspended in quiet awe. Then Walter Langston stirred. His eyes opened barely but undeniably. The old man blinked once. His hand, frail and liver-spotted, lifted from the blanket and groped toward the air. The little girl's eyes widened in fear. Hank stepped in. He moved to the bedside, gently catching Walter's wrist and easing it back onto the mattress. The old man's eyes flickered toward him. "Protect her," he whispered, voice brittle as paper. "Promise me." Hank stared. "Sir." But Walter's eyes had already begun to close again. The heart monitor steadied. The machine kept its slow, stubborn rhythm. The girl turned to Hank then. Her expression was half hope, half terror. "I didn't mean to," she stammered. He knelt beside her, the tile cool beneath his knees. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Maisie," she whispered. "Maisie Quinn." Maisie, Hank repeated. "Where are your parents?" She looked down. They went to heaven. Something in Hank's chest tightened. He recognized that hollow look in her eyes. It was the same look his 6-year-old daughter Daisy had the day her mother's casket was lowered into the earth. It was the look of a child trying to be brave, while the world gave no reason to. "Where have you been sleeping?" he asked. Maisie's voice got smaller. "Behind the ambulance garage. There's a warm vent there." He closed his eyes briefly. the vent. Of course. He'd felt heat loss from the building's HVAC last week and never thought to check. "Do you have anyone looking for you?" She shook her head. "I don't think so." He looked at her shoes, tattered, soaked from the drizzle outside, then back at Walter, whose chest rose and fell under the oxygen line. What the hell was happening here? This wasn't supposed to be his job. He fixed things. He didn't take in lost children. But then again, 5 years ago, he hadn't planned on becoming a single father either. He stood and offered his hand. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you out of here." She hesitated. "Are you going to call the police?" "Eventually," he replied. "But first, let's find you some dry clothes and something warm to eat." Maisie slipped her hand into his. It was cold and bird-like. As they walked out of room 703, Walter's fingers twitched once beneath the blanket like a final stamp of approval. They slipped past the nurse's station. Hank didn't know what he'd tell security yet. He just hoped his access badge would get them to the lower level unnoticed. Maisie was quiet, but she kept glancing up at him. "Why did you help me?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Because," he finally said, "I once made a promise to a little girl that I didn't keep. I'm not going to do that again." Maisie didn't ask more questions. She just squeezed his hand tighter. When they reached the underground exit, the rain had stopped, leaving the night air cold and damp. Hank opened the passenger door of his rusted Ford pickup and helped Maisie climb in. He looked back at the hospital one last time. The windows of room 703 still glowed faintly. He didn't know it yet, but that night would change everything. Not just for Maisie Quinn, but for him, for Daisy, and for the dying billionaire who'd finally whispered his last wish. And Hank Sullivan had just said, yes. The drive home was quiet. Maisie sat with her knees tucked to her chest in the passenger seat of Hank's truck, wrapped in an oversized gray hoodie he'd pulled from the back seat. The sleeves swallowed her arms. Rain tapped lightly on the windshield mist, clinging to the glass like breath held too long. Hank glanced at her from time to time, watching how she stared at the road, not like someone expecting to arrive anywhere, but like someone who had stopped believing in destinations. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Maisie nodded. "I've got peanut butter and crackers at home. Not fancy, but it'll fill you up." She nodded again, then hesitated. "Is your daughter?" "Nice." That caught him off guard. "Daisy?" "Yeah, she's the best part of me." Maisie didn't smile, but something in her face softened. "She's lucky." "No." Hank said, his voice almost too low. "I'm the lucky one." His house wasn't much, a small single-story rental on the edge of town. The porch light flickered, the yard needed mowing, and the front door stuck if you didn't lift it just right. But it was warm, and it smelled like cinnamon from the air freshener Daisy insisted on taping near the heater vents. Inside, the living room was scattered with children's books, a sockless Barbie, and a stuffed elephant with only one ear. Daisy, still awake, sat cross-legged on the couch in mismatched pajamas, holding a picture book about stars. When she saw Hank walk in with a strange little girl behind him, her eyes widened. Daddy Hank stepped aside. "This is Maisie. She's staying with us tonight." Daisy blinked. Then, to Hank's surprise, she hopped down and walked straight to Maisie. "Do you want to sleep in my room?" she asked. "I have glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, and you can pick which side of the bed." Maisie hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Okay," Daisy said with a smile, "but I warn you, I kick in my sleep." Hank stood frozen, a lump rising in his throat. His little girl, who'd once refused to let a neighbor kid borrow her crayons, was offering half her bed to a complete stranger. Maybe children saw what adults forgot to look for. After they ate, after the girls were asleep, Hank stood in the doorway of Daisy's room. The two of them were curled under the same quilt, Maisie's arm flung across Daisy's stomach, like a life preserver. In the pale glow of the ceiling stars, Hank saw Maisie's face relax for the first time since she'd spoken in the hospital. She looked safe. He moved quietly to the kitchen, poured a cup of decaf, and sat at the table. The silence of the house settled around him, but his mind refused to rest. He thought about Walter Langston, about the moment the old man had opened his eyes, about those words, protect her, promise me. It wasn't just a dying man's delusion. Something had happened when that girl sang, something real. And now she was asleep in his daughter's bed. He didn't know who Maisie Quinn really was, where she'd come from, or what wounds she carried behind those wide, haunted eyes. But he knew this: she was alone, and she wouldn't survive much longer if the world kept turning the way it had. The next morning, Hank called in sick. It was the first time in 3 years he'd used that excuse. He fed the girls pancakes and watched as they traded silly faces over orange juice. Maisie was still quiet, but Daisy filled the silence with jokes, questions, and spontaneous impressions of cartoon characters. Maisie never laughed aloud, but her eyes shimmered more with every passing hour. It wasn't until after breakfast, while folding laundry in the hallway, that Hank noticed something. Maisie was staring at a photo frame on the bookshelf. It was the only picture he kept out from before a candid snapshot of his wife, Hannah, holding baby Daisy in a field of sunflowers. She was beautiful, Maisie said softly. Hank turned, surprised. Maisie looked up. Is she in heaven too? Yeah, Hank said. His voice caught just for a second. She passed when Daisy was just 3. Maisie nodded as if that explained everything. Then she said, My mama told me heaven's above the clouds. That's why I sing. I figure if I sing loud enough, maybe she'll hear me. Hank sat down on the floor beside her. The laundry basket tipped slightly, socks spilling out. You think it works? He asked. Maisie shrugged. I don't know, but it makes me feel less gone. That word, gone. Like she believed she had disappeared from the world and no one noticed. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not just a fragile little girl, but a soul trying to hold itself together with songs and half-remembered lullabies. You're not gone, Hank said. Not anymore. Later that day, he called Dr. Elise Marlowe. She was surprised to hear from him. You're not in trouble, she said after he explained. But you do need to report this. Legally. I know, Hank said. I will. I just needed to make sure she was okay first. There was a pause on the line. Then that little girl. She saved him, Hank. You mean Mr. Langston? He was nearly gone. We were ready to let him go. But after she sang, he stabilized. His vitals bounced. It wasn't just medical, it was something else. Hank didn't reply. He didn't have words for what he'd felt either. Bring her in for a wellness check, Dr. Marlowe added. No paperwork yet. Just a look over. Thank you. She paused again. Hank, be careful. If Graham Langston finds out there's a child in the picture, especially one Walter reacted to, he won't take it well. Understood. He hung up, looking back at the girls playing with sidewalk chalk in the driveway. Daisy was drawing a sun. Maisie was drawing clouds. And in the corner above it all, a faint outline of a woman with wings. By Monday morning, the headlines had already started circling. Mysterious child linked to ailing billionaire Langston family. Denies rumors of secret heir. Hospital staff stunned by taped ICU encounter. Hank didn't have to see the articles to feel the shift. Nurses in the hallway spoke in low tones. Aides who once greeted him with nods now looked away. Even the janitor, a Vietnam vet named Curtis, who shared coffee with him during overnight shifts, barely met his eyes. He knew why. Maisie. Somebody had seen them, or maybe heard Walter speak, and now people were talking. Walter Langston was still alive, barely. His doctors described his condition as provisionally stabilized. But he hadn't spoken again since that night, hadn't opened his eyes. It was as if his soul had surfaced just long enough to ask for one thing, that someone protect the girl who brought him back from the edge. And now that someone was Hank Sullivan, "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Elise Marlowe asked, looking at Hank over the rim of her coffee cup in the hospital break room. She'd seen Maisie 2 days ago, completed a full medical exam, and signed off on a temporary clearance to avoid child protective services for the moment. Elise wasn't just a brilliant cardiologist. She was also a widow, a mother who knew the fragile shape of grief. That gave her words weight. Hank rubbed a hand over his jaw. "No, I'm not sure of anything. But she's sleeping through the night, eating, laughing. I haven't seen a kid change that fast since Daisy said her first full sentence the week after her mom died." Elise lowered her voice. "You know what it looks like to everyone else, right? She's not some grifter. I know that. You know that. But the press, Graham Langston, they'll turn her into a tabloid tragedy if they get wind of where she is." Hank leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking. "I gave Walter my word. That has to count for something." Elise studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow, knowing smile. "It does. To people like us, it still counts." That night, Daisy asked a question at bedtime Hank hadn't prepared for. "Daddy, is Maisie going to live with us forever?" He looked up from the storybook in his lap. Maisie was already asleep, curled in a sleeping bag beside Daisy's bed. A new toothbrush sat on the bathroom counter, a pair of donated sneakers drying by the heater, the kind of small signs that over time added up to belonging. "I don't know yet," Hank said. Daisy frowned. "Do I have to share you forever, too?" Hank closed the book, brushing her hair back behind her ear. "I have enough love for both of you, Bug," he said gently. "That's not something that runs out." Daisy blinked. "But what if she has to go away?" Like Mama, his chest tightened. He had no good answer. Only a truth that was honest, if not comforting. "I hope she doesn't," he said. "But even if she does, she won't be gone. Not from us. Not really." Daisy seemed to accept that for now. She turned over, pulling the blanket up to her chin. "I think she sings like stars sound." Hank paused. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Me too." 2 days later, Graham Langston showed up. No press, no entourage, just a tailored black coat, a trimmed silver beard, and eyes like polished steel. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't have to. "I want to speak with you," he said to Hank in the hospital maintenance bay. Hank put down his clipboard slowly. "About what?" "About what you're harboring." That choice of words struck Hank like a slap. "She's a child." Graham's tone was calm, almost clinical. "She's a liability. My brother is dying. His legacy is fragile. And if the press gets hold of some half-formed fairy tale about a runaway girl with a lullaby that cured a coma, Langston Arrow suffers." Hank crossed his arms. Walter made his wishes pretty clear. "Walter is no longer of sound mind," Graham said flatly. "He hasn't signed a valid document in months. He signed one 3 days ago, witnessed by Dr. Marlowe, naming me as Maisie's temporary guardian. That was a bluff, barely legal and entirely informal. But Graham didn't blink. "Then I suggest you reconsider before this becomes a legal matter." "What exactly are you threatening?" Hank asked, his voice low. Graham smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. "I'm not threatening. I'm offering you a way out. Cash. Enough to make sure your daughter never has to share you again." And there it was. The part Hank hated most. The assumption that everything and everyone had a price. That night, Hank told Elise what had happened. They sat in her office after hours, the door closed, blinds drawn. He offered money, Hank said. Said I could walk away. What did you say? I told him to shove it. Elise didn't laugh, but her eyes warmed with approval. You know he's not going to stop, right? She said. The only reason Graham Langston hasn't filed an injunction is because he's trying to keep this quiet. But the more Walter clings to life, the more desperate he'll get. Hank looked out the window, where a gust of wind stirred the bare branches outside. I've never been a hero, Elise. I'm just a guy trying to keep a promise. She stood and moved beside him, her voice soft. Then be the kind of man who shows that promises still matter. Back home, Hank found Maisie on the back porch, staring up at the sky. Daisy was already asleep. He sat beside her, the wooden steps creaking beneath his weight. I heard about the man who came today, Maisie said without turning. Did Daisy tell you? Maisie shook her head. I just know the look you get when someone tries to take something from you. Hank exhaled. He won't take you. Maisie hesitated. What if I mess it up? What if I do something wrong and you stop wanting to protect me? He turned to her, the porch light casting soft shadows on her face. Maisie, this isn't about what you do. It's about who you are. And I don't protect you because you sang. I protect you because someone should have done it long before now. Maisie finally looked at him. I think Walter knew that. That's why he picked you. Hank swallowed hard. I hope I'm enough. Maisie leaned her head on his shoulder. You are. The envelope came 3 days later. Plain white. No return address. Hand-delivered to the front door. Inside was a single photograph, blurry, but unmistakable. Hank, Maisie, and Daisy, standing in line at the corner diner after church on Sunday. Maisie was holding a cup of hot chocolate. Daisy was grinning. Hank's hand rested gently on both their shoulders. Folded behind the photo was a typed note. Keep her out of the public eye. There will not be a second warning. No signature. No threats. Just facts. Hank stared at it for a long time. His fingers clenched around the paper, but he didn't tear it. He didn't need a signature to know who'd sent it. At the hospital, things got colder. One of the senior administrators, a man Hank had fixed thermostats for 3 winters in a row, suddenly stopped returning his greetings. Shift rotations changed without notice. Hank found himself reassigned to less critical wings, places where security was less of a concern, the supervisor said flatly. Even Curtis, the janitor who once smuggled him extra donuts on Friday mornings, only gave him a nod now. None of it was official. There were no written complaints. But Hank could feel it like a draft in a sealed room. Graham Langston's reach was growing. Maisie, for her part, noticed little of it. She was too busy being 10. In the span of a week, she had learned to ride Daisy's old bike, helped bake blueberry muffins burned, but edible, and invented a bedtime game called Cloud Catchers, where she and Daisy would take turns describing what clouds would taste like if they were desserts. Mine's lemon cotton candy, Daisy would shout. Mine's vanilla snow, Maisie would reply. And every night before the lights went out, Maisie would whisper a soft tune. Never the same one twice, always just loud enough to touch the air. It wasn't performance, it was prayer. But Hank noticed something else too. Maisie had started checking the locks twice before bed. She kept her shoes by the door. And once when Daisy threw a tantrum over sharing her hairbrush, Maisie backed up like she expected to be hit. Hank knelt beside her, later gently cupping her hands. No one here will ever hurt you, he said. Maisie didn't cry. She just nodded. She didn't know yet how to trust safety when it showed up uninvited. At the hospital, Walter Langston remained unconscious. His heartbeat was steady, but his EEG showed little change. Elise visited him daily, adjusting meds, checking charts. No major progress, no decline. It's like he's waiting for something she said to Hank one evening, or someone he replied. She studied him for a moment, her face softening. You know, not all men would have done what you did. Taken in a child you didn't know. Risked this much. I didn't do it to be noble. No, you didn't, she said. That's why it matters. Then came the press. A reporter from a tabloid blog cornered Hank in the hospital parking lot one morning. Mr. Sullivan Care to comment on the child seen singing beside Walter Langston's bed the night he woke. I have no comment. Is she a Langston heir? No comment. Is it true you're being paid off to keep her quiet? Hank's jaw clenched. He didn't answer. That night, he installed a new chain lock on the front door and a security camera above the porch, just in case. At dinner, Daisy asked a question that landed like a stone in Hank's chest. Is Maisie going to be taken away? Maisie froze mid-bite. Hank set his fork down. No. No one's taken anyone. But someone at school said, doesn't matter what they said. Hank interrupted. You both are safe. That's all that matters. Maisie pushed her plate away. People always say that, until they change their minds. Hank turned to her, his voice calm but steady. I won't change my mind. You live here now. This is your home. Maisie didn't reply. But Daisy reached across the table and took her hand. Later that night, after the girls were asleep, Hank stood in the kitchen with Elise. She had stopped by after her shift, under the pretense of dropping off children's vitamins from the clinic. Graham's not backing down, Hank said. He's just getting started. I know. He's trying to make me look unstable, irresponsible, like I'm putting my own daughter in danger. And are you, Elise asked gently. No. Then he can't win. Not if you keep standing. Hank leaned against the counter, his shoulders tight. What if they call CPS? What if someone files an anonymous complaint and they come knocking? Then you show them the truth. He looked up. You really believe that's enough? I do, she said. Because I've seen the way that girl looks at you. And more importantly, I've seen the way she stopped looking at herself, like she didn't matter. Hank closed his eyes. All he had done was make a promise. And keep it. But maybe that was enough to start changing the world for someone like Maisie. Outside, rain began to fall light and steady. Maisie sat on the porch, her back against the siding, a notebook open on her lap. She didn't look up when Hank stepped outside. You okay? He asked. She nodded. Just writing. What about songs I want to remember? For if I ever forget who I am. Hank knelt beside her. Want help remembering? Maisie looked at him. Really looked. No, she said, smiling faintly. I think I'm starting to remember all by myself. It was a Tuesday morning when the music stopped. Not the background melodies that filled Hank's kitchen. Those kept playing soft acoustic ballads and old Motown hits that Daisy insisted were happy music. Not even Maisie's humming, which had become as much a part of the house as the scent of cinnamon or the soft creak of the front steps. No, this silence was different. It came after the call from the school counselor. It came after Maisie stopped speaking altogether. They had enrolled her under her full name, Maisie Quinn, keeping it simple. Quiet, off the radar. Elise had vouched for her medical records. Hank had taken unpaid leave from work to attend every meeting. They'd done everything by the book, or so he thought. Until the phone rang at 10:42 a.m. Mr. Sullivan, the voice said there's been an incident. He found her in the nurse's office, sitting stiffly on the vinyl bench, eyes hollow. A scratch ran down the side of her cheek. Her backpack strap was torn. Daisy sat next to her, holding her hand, face red from crying. The counselor explained it carefully. A group of older students recognized her from a photo circulating online. One of them cornered her during recess, accused her of being a fake heiress and a liar. Another child shoved her, She fell, hit her face on the chain-link post. The words were clinical, controlled. But Hank's hands curled into fists beneath the table. Back home, Maisie said nothing. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She simply sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded in her lap as if trying not to take up space. Like the safest place in the world was to disappear. Daisy brought her a cup of cocoa. Maisie didn't touch it. She didn't eat dinner either. When bedtime came, she crawled into her blanket without brushing her teeth, without whispering a song, without a sound. Hank sat in the kitchen, head bowed, elbows on the table. Elise sat across from him. She'd come as soon as he'd called. "She won't talk," he said. "Not even to Daisy." "She's in protective shutdown," Elise said softly. "It's a coping mechanism for trauma. She'd made so much progress. I thought she was safe now." "She is," Elise said gently. "But trauma isn't linear. Healing isn't a straight path. This was a setback, not the end." She looked right through me, Elise, like I wasn't even there. "She sees you," Elise said. But right now she's seeing something else more clearly, what the world once did to her. She's remembering. Hank rubbed his face, weary. "I want to fix it. I don't know how." "You can't fix it," she said. "But you can sit with her in the silence until she feels safe enough to come back." That night, Hank laid a folded blanket at the foot of Maisie's bed. He didn't try to talk. He didn't ask questions. He just sat in the chair near the window and waited. An hour passed, then another. Around midnight, Daisy shuffled in sleepy-eyed. She still won't say anything she asked. Hank shook his head. Daisy crawled under the blanket beside Maisie, placed one small hand over hers, and whispered, "You're still here. That means the world didn't win." Maisie didn't respond, but her fingers curled around Daisy's. The next morning, Hank called the school and withdrew both girls temporarily. He made pancakes with blueberries and extra syrup. Maisie stared at hers. Daisy ate silently. By noon, they were sitting on a picnic blanket in the backyard. The sun was out. Hank pulled out an old guitar, one he hadn't touched in years. He strummed a chord, rough, dusty. Then another. "Your mom," he said, "used to play this." He played a few bars of "You Are My Sunshine." His voice cracked on the second verse. He looked up. Maisie wasn't crying, but she was listening. "Sometimes," he said, "when I couldn't talk after she passed, I played this. It helped." He offered the guitar. She shook her head slowly, but her hand rested on the neck for just a moment, long enough to feel the strings. That night, after Daisy had gone to sleep, Hank found Maisie sitting on the porch swing. She held her notebook, but it was closed. He sat beside her, watching the sky shift from orange to blue to black. She finally spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper. "They said I was pretending. That people like me don't belong in places like that." Hank's jaw tightened. "They were wrong." Maisie looked up at him. "I believed them. For a minute." He swallowed. And now she was quiet for a long time. "I'm not sure yet." "That's okay," he said. "You don't have to be sure today." She looked down at her hands. "I couldn't sing. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. That's okay too." She blinked. "But what if it never comes back?" Hank reached over, placing a hand gently over hers. "Then we find another way to let you be heard." Maisie stared at their hands. Then she leaned her head against his shoulder. And for the first time in 2 days, her breath came evenly. Later that week, while Daisy napped and Hank fixed the back fence, he heard something. A sound from Maisie's room. Not singing, humming. Soft, incomplete, barely a whisper of melody. But it was music, and it was hers. The first thing Maisie asked for, when her voice returned, was her notebook. She didn't say much, still chose quiet when silence offered safety. but the way she handled the worn, spiral-bound journal said more than words could. She carried it everywhere, scribbled in it while Daisy read beside her, doodled treble clefs in the margins while Hank cooked dinner, drew clouds and stars and silhouettes of paper planes. On one page, Hank spotted a single line written in neat cursive, "The sky doesn't fall. People just forget how to look up." He stared at it longer than he meant to. Later that week, Elise invited Hank to meet her at the Langston Foundation archives officially for a routine facilities check. In truth, she'd secured temporary access to a restricted floor under the guise of preparing Walter's medical history for the board's legal team. But she had a different motive. "I think there's more to the crash that took Walter's family than anyone saying she told him." "You think Graham was involved?" Hank asked. "I think Graham's been cleaning up after something. And I think Walter knew." They met just after closing. The archives were tucked beneath the Langston campus, a temperature-controlled maze of cabinets, boxes, and servers humming behind locked glass. Elise led Hank to a narrow corridor marked Aero Operations, 2015-2022. She pulled out a file labeled Flight 715 Incident Preliminary Review. Hank flipped through maintenance logs, transcripts, redacted emails. Then he found it. A memo dated 6 weeks before the crash, from Graham Langston to Aero Safety Division. Subject: emergency fuel, redundancy systems, cost savings proposal. We recommend immediate reevaluation of secondary fuel backup systems for Langston Aero mid-range fleets. If implementation of cost reduction measures remains delayed, quarterly revenue projections will fall short. Decision pending. Beside it was a signature. Faint, but unmistakable. Walter's son, Daniel Langston, had piloted that flight. His wife and daughter had been on board. All three had died in the crash. "Jesus," Hank muttered. Elise looked over his shoulder. "This was never supposed to be seen," she said. "Because it's a smoking gun. Because it's a betrayal." Hank sat back, heart racing. Walter didn't just want Maisie protected. He wanted the truth out. "That girl brought him back from the edge," Elise said softly. "She lit a fuse under a story someone tried to bury, and Graham's still trying to smother it." Elise met his eyes. "We have to decide what to do with this." They returned home late. Maisie and Daisy were already asleep, curled side by side, like they'd never known a world without each other. Hank sat on the porch, the file in his lap as night deepened. He thought of Walter's voice, how it had rasped that night. "Protect her. Promise me." At the time, he'd thought it was about safety. Now he realized it was about legacy. Walter hadn't just seen Maisie as a child in need. He'd seen her as a light in the darkness, proof that beauty could survive after the sky falls. And Hank had promised to guard that light. The next morning, the doorbell rang at 8:03. Standing on the porch was a courier in a navy blazer, holding an envelope marked Urgent Confidential. Hank signed for it, closed the door, opened it. Inside, a legal notice. Langston Aero Internal Affairs Committee requesting full deposition regarding minor known as Maisie Quinn and her contact with Walter Langston prior to hospitalization. In short, they wanted everything. His involvement, Elise's, Maisie's presence in the ICU, every detail documented and submitted within 5 business days. Underneath the letter was a typed line in small, sterile font. Failure to comply may result in court-ordered intervention. Hank didn't tell the girls. Instead, he took them out. He drove them 2 towns over where no one knew their names and bought them ice cream for lunch. They visited a petting zoo. They fed goats and named a sheep Walter. Daisy rode a pony, and Maisie sketched birds on the back of a napkin. For a moment, it felt like they were just a family. No lawsuits, no billionaires, No legacy wars. Just 3 souls holding on to joy wherever they could find it. That night, Hank stood in the kitchen with Elise, the file between them. "They're coming for her," he said quietly. "They can't just take her. They don't have to take her. All they have to do is scare me enough to give her up." Elise looked down, then back at him. "So don't be scared. I'm a father," he said. "Fear comes with the job. Then be afraid. But do it anyway." Hank gave a small laugh. "You always know the right thing to say." "No," Elise replied. "I just remember what it felt like when I lost my daughter, and how long I waited for someone to say it to me." The silence between them held something deeper than comfort. Something like understanding. That night, Maisie approached Hank as he was folding laundry. She held her notebook against her chest. "I remember something she said quietly." Hank looked up. "The night the plane crashed. I wasn't there, but Mama was crying in the kitchen. She had the phone on speaker." Hank sat down beside her. Maisie's eyes didn't blink. She said, "You told them to cut the system, Graham. You cut the system." And then she looked at me and said, "Never let people make you small, Maisie. Never let them steal your song." Hank's breath caught. "You think she knew it would happen?" Maisie shook her head. "I think she already knew it had." He held her hand gently. "You still remember her voice?" Maisie nodded. "Then she's not gone." Maisie smiled, small, tired, but real. And for the first time in weeks, Hank felt something shift. Not just hope, but courage. The kind that comes from knowing you're no longer running from the storm, but walking straight into it, hand in hand, with someone who believes in you. The van came just after school let out. It was an ordinary gray Sprinter, clean, unmarked, the kind used for catering or church groups. Nothing about it said danger. Nothing except the way it waited at the far end of the parking lot engine, idling windows up. Maisie never saw it coming. 1 minute she was walking beside Daisy, chattering about how her drawing had won first place in the art fair. The next, someone in a black ball cap stepped out from behind the van, called her name, and reached. Daisy screamed. Maisie's notebook hit the asphalt, and just like that, she was gone. Hank arrived at the school in a dead sprint. The principal tried to stop him at the front office, but he pushed through. Elise was already there, still in her scrubs, face pale, fury etched into every line. Daisy saw it. She set her voice tight. She tried to hold on to Maisie's arm, but the man shoved her away. "Who was it?" Hank's voice was gravel. "They don't know yet. No license plate. No witnesses got a clear view. The school cameras were offline." "Offline," Hank repeated as if the word were poison. "Police officers were combing the parking lot." Daisy sat in a chair wrapped in a foil blanket, her small hands shaking. Hank crouched in front of her. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" "She's gone," Daisy whispered. "They took her." Tears welled up in Hank's eyes, but he held them back. For Daisy. For Maisie. For the promise. That night, the house was too quiet. The air was thick, like grief had settled into the walls. Maisie's toothbrush still sat in its holder. Her shoes were by the front door. Her blanket still crumpled on the couch. From that morning smelled faintly of cinnamon and lavender. Hank stood in the hallway, his fists clenched. "I should have seen this coming," he muttered. Elise was on the phone in the kitchen demanding updates from police. Nothing new. No suspects. No evidence. Just a dozen "will keep you posted" replies. "She was just a kid," Hank said. "She trusted me." "You didn't fail her," Elise said gently. "I was the one thing standing between her and the people who wanted to use her. And I'd let them take her." "No," Elise said. "They took her. And we're getting her back." The next morning, a package arrived. No return address. Inside Maisie's notebook. The cover was torn. The pages smudged. Taped to the front was a sticky note with one sentence. She's safer without you. Hank sat at the kitchen table staring at it for a long time. Then he flipped to the last page. There, in Maisie's handwriting, written with a shaky hand, but unmistakably hers, was a single sentence. "Don't give up. I'm still singing." His vision blurred. He wiped his eyes, then stood. "Get your coat," he said to Elise. "We're going to the Langston building." Langston Aero's downtown headquarters loomed like a cathedral of glass and steel. Security guards at the front tried to block them, but Elise pulled rank. "We have legal and medical records directly relevant to Walter Langston's condition. Denying access without cause opens you to obstruction." 10 minutes later, they were sitting in a private conference room. Graham Langston walked in wearing a smile like armor. He didn't sit. He placed both hands on the back of a leather chair and looked at Hank like a man examining a broken appliance. "Quite the spectacle," Graham said. "The police at your house. The girl vanishing. One might think you've lost control." "She's a child," Hank said, barely containing himself. "And you're using her like leverage. I'm protecting a corporation, a name, a legacy. Walter's legacy isn't your property." Graham's jaw twitched. "Walter is incapacitated, and you, Mr. Sullivan, are nothing. A handyman with delusions of nobility." Hank reached into his coat and pulled out the flight memo, the one with Graham's signature. He slid it across the table. Graham didn't flinch. "You went digging," he said softly. "I found the truth. And what do you plan to do with it?" "Whatever I have to. Unless you give me Maisie." "Now." Graham's smile faded. "You think you're a hero, Hank. You're not. You're a temporary man in a temporary story. But I've built empires on silencing better men than you. You won't silence her." "She's just a girl," Graham said coldly. "She's a girl with a song that made your brother live again." Graham leaned forward. "And that's what makes her dangerous." They were escorted out of the building, not arrested, not threatened again. But the message was clear. This was war. That night, Hank couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch, Maisie's notebook in his lap, fingers tracing the last sentence like a prayer. "Don't give up. I'm still singing." Around midnight, Daisy came outside wrapped in a blanket. She sat beside him, small and strong. "Do you think she's scared?" Daisy asked. "I think she's brave," Hank said. "But yes, I think she's scared." Daisy was quiet for a while. Then she said, "You always said being a dad meant showing up, even when it's hard." Hank looked at her. "Yeah." "Then show up, Dad." He nodded. "I will." And in that moment, something inside him shifted. Not rage, not despair, conviction. The kind that anchors a man when everything else falls apart. He pulled out his phone, called Elise. "I need to go public," he said. "The whole truth. The crash, the girl, everything." "It'll be dangerous," Elise warned. "For you, for Daisy." "She's right. I need to show up." Elise paused. "I'll help you write the statement, because sometimes the only way to protect a child is to stop hiding and start speaking." The rain had begun hours earlier, a steady curtain that draped the city in cold gray. It tapped like fingers on windshields, pooled along sidewalks, and ran in thin rivers along the glass facade of the Langston Aero Tower. 27 stories up on a private rooftop, normally reserved for board receptions and helicopter landings, the sky churned like something ancient had been awakened. Maisie Quinn stood near the edge, her wrists bound with plastic zip ties, her hair soaked and clinging to her face. She wore the same sweatshirt she'd been taken in Daisy's old hoodie, with a unicorn sticker peeling from the sleeve. Behind her, 2 men in black jackets stood like shadows. And 5 feet away, Graham Langston watched the storm. He wasn't armed. He didn't need to be. The threat came from the height, the silence, and the way he smiled as if he were still completely in control. "You know what the problem with symbols is?" Graham asked over the wind. "They become too powerful, too fast. People start listening, believing." Maisie said nothing. She hadn't spoken since the van, but she was still humming, softly, barely audible, like she was singing to the clouds themselves. Hank arrived with Elise in the freight elevator. They burst out into the storm, breathless, soaked, and shaking. Graham turned as if only mildly surprised. "Well," he said, "I hoped you'd come. Saves me the trouble of another delivery." "Let her go," Hank said, his voice low and deadly. "Of course. After you hand over the memo. The only copy, Mr. Sullivan." Hank didn't move. He pulled the folded paper from his jacket, held it over the open air beyond the rooftop's edge. One step toward her, and this drops. Graham's eyes narrowed. "You won't do it." "She's 10, Hank growled. "And you're threatening her because you're too much of a coward to face your brother's legacy." Graham's calm cracked. For just a second, the storm outside mirrored the storm in his eyes. "You don't know what's at stake." "I know exactly what's at stake," Hank said. "Her life, my daughter's safety, the truth." Rain whipped between them like a curtain of needles. Elise moved to Maisie, slowly, hands raised. The two men blocking the girl looked to Graham. He didn't speak, but he didn't stop them either. Elise reached Maisie and dropped to her knees, shielding her with her body. "She's coming home," she said, softly, slicing the zip tie with a penknife. Maisie looked up at her eyes glassy. "I was singing," she whispered, even when they didn't listen. "I know," Elise said. "We heard you." Hank took a step closer. "You've already lost Graham." The older man scoffed. "What, you think some media interview and a few sob stories will change a corporation's fate? You think investors care about lullabies?" "No," Hank said. "But they care about liability. They care about cover-ups. And they care about men like you destroying everything decent in the name of profit." Graham stepped forward. "You drop that memo and she falls with it." Hank's grip tightened. "You want me to believe you'd hurt a child in front of a doctor, a veteran, and 2 security cameras?" Graham smiled grimly. "I want you to believe I'm the only one willing to do what's necessary." Then he stepped too close, and Hank let the memo go. It sailed through the rain like a paper bird over the edge, gone to the wind. Graham lunged, but Elise was faster. She pulled Maisie back, shielding her as Hank moved in. In the chaos, Graham slipped. His foot caught on the slick edge of the rooftop grill. For a moment, he teetered. Then Hank reached out, caught him by the wrist. Rain poured down his arm, soaked his sleeves. Their eyes locked. "You don't get to fall that easy," Hank said. Graham stared at him, incredulous. "You should have let me go. I'm not like you." With Elise's help, Hank pulled him back from the edge. Graham collapsed, gasping. Not from fear, but from the realization that he hadn't been worth saving in his own mind. They left him there. The police arrived minutes later, called in by Elise from her phone, which had been recording everything since the moment they stepped onto the rooftop. Graham didn't resist. He sat against the railing, watching the skyline disappear into mist, his empire unraveling. Downstairs, Maisie sat wrapped in a silver thermal blanket. Daisy burst through the hospital lobby doors minutes later and threw her arms around her. Maisie didn't speak. She just wept. For the first time in weeks, she cried without shame, without apology. And her voice came back not in song, but in sobs. It was the most beautiful sound Hank had ever heard. Later that night, back home, Elise helped Hank tuck Maisie into her bed. She looked smaller somehow, like part of her had been broken, and part of her reborn. Hank sat beside her, brushing a damp curl from her forehead. "I thought I'd never see you again," he whispered. "I was afraid," Maisie said, voice rough from silence. "I was too." She looked up at him, eyes wide. But I remembered something. What Maisie reached for her notebook, flipping to the back page. She pointed to the final line. "Don't give up." "I'm still singing." Hank smiled. "I'll never forget it." Maisie hesitated. Then she asked, "Will you stay tonight, just?" "Until I fall asleep, I'll stay," he said without hesitation. "As long as you need." She nodded. And with Daisy curled on the floor beside her and Elise leaning against the doorframe, Maisie finally closed her eyes. And this time, when she dreamed the sky didn't fall, it opened. Walter Langston passed away on a Wednesday morning just before sunrise. It was quiet. Peaceful. He'd never spoken again after the rooftop incident, but Hank liked to believe he'd been listening. That somehow, even in silence, he'd known his promise had been honored. That the girl whose voice had stirred his soul was safe. Elise was the one who called Hank with the news. "He's gone," she said softly. He passed with the rain still on the windows. Hank closed his eyes. For a man who had once owned the sky, Walter's final journey was simple, but the ripple he left behind would stretch far beyond the clouds. The reading of the will took place in a small conference room on the 13th floor of Langston Aero. Ironic, Hank thought, since Walter had never been superstitious. A woman in a gray skirt suit introduced herself as Eleanor Walsh, the family attorney for over 2 decades. She spoke with crisp diction and gentle command, like someone who had watched fortunes rise and fall and knew how to carry grief in a briefcase. Walter's estate was vast: real estate shares, patents, holdings, foundations. Most of it had already been arranged trusts locked in place long before his hospitalization. But the surprise came in the final clause. To Maisie Quinn, the child who reminded me that light can still find a way through closed doors, I leave a 40% stake in the Langston Aero Foundation to be held in trust until her 25th birthday. In the interim, the foundation shall be managed by Mr. Hank Sullivan and Dr. Elise Marlowe, who have demonstrated the kind of integrity this name was once built upon. A stunned silence filled the room. Graham Langston's seat notably was empty. He was still awaiting trial held without bail on charges of unlawful detainment, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to falsify safety records. But even if he had been free, he wouldn't have had a single page left to tear from Walter's story. The final chapter was already written. Back at home, Hank sat on the porch swing with Maisie beside him. She wore a new pair of shoes, the first she'd ever picked out for herself, and a sky-blue dress with tiny embroidered stars at the hem. The notebook rested on her lap, closed. She hadn't written in it since the rooftop. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Maisie shrugged. "A little big." "Big," she looked down at her hands. "Like the world expects me to be something I'm not ready to be yet." Hank nodded slowly. "Well, here's the thing," he said. "You don't have to be anything today. Or tomorrow. You just have to be you." Maisie looked up at him. "Is that enough?" He smiled. "It's everything." She leaned her head against his shoulder. The porch creaked softly beneath them. Somewhere inside, Daisy was practicing piano, one of the songs Maisie used to hum in her sleep. Life was creeping back in. Not loud, not fast, but sure. Later that week, the foundation's official rebranding was announced, the Sky Song Initiative. A new division under Langston Aero, dedicated to providing music therapy, youth aviation programs, and trauma recovery resources for children in foster care. Maisie's name was not used publicly, but those who mattered knew, and those who didn't, they just heard the music. The press came knocking, of course. They wanted exclusive interviews, dramatic retellings, the girl who sang a billionaire back-to-life stories. Maisie declined them all. But she said yes to one thing a visit to the Children's Hospital in Springfield. She didn't sing. Not at first. She just listened. Sat beside beds, handed out notebooks, told kids about the stars on her ceiling, and how clouds tasted like vanilla snow. But before they left, one child, a frail boy with a nasal cannula, asked if she remembered the song, the one that made the man wake up. Maisie paused. Then softly, without instruments or microphones, she began to sing. Somewhere over the rainbow. Hank watched from the hallway, and for a moment it felt like the whole world held its breath. Back home, Elise cooked dinner. Daisy set the table with mismatched napkins and too many forks. Maisie drew a mural in chalk on the back patio, a girl flying a paper airplane toward a glowing moon. And Hank. He stood in the kitchen doorway watching them all. Not just survivors, but builders. Weavers of something new. Later, as the sky shifted from golden to lavender, Maisie and Daisy curled up on the couch, sharing a blanket and a bowl of popcorn. Hank stepped outside. Elise joined him, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "They seem good tonight," she said. "They are," Hank replied. "So am I." Elise looked at him. "You really think we can do this? Raise 2 girls, run a foundation, survive elementary school lunches?" She laughed. All of it. Hank looked up at the sky. There was a time I didn't think I had anything left. No purpose, no chance, no voice. He turned to her. But then a little girl sang in a hospital hallway, and everything changed. Elise nodded. "She saved you?" Hank smiled. "No." She reminded me I wasn't gone. Inside, Maisie was laughing. A sound full and warm and completely alive. And somewhere Hank thought Walter Langston was finally at peace. 3 years later, the runway at Sky Song Aviation and Arts Center shimmered beneath the Missouri sun. It wasn't large, just a single paved strip, bordered by tall grasses and wildflowers, but it was enough to launch dreams. Enough for the twin-engine trainer aircraft that now rolled slowly toward takeoff position, its white wings etched with a child's drawing of clouds and stars. Inside the cockpit sat Maisie Quinn. 15 years old now, she wore a headset, a blue Langston Aero flight uniform tailored to her small frame, and a bracelet Daisy had made out of piano wire and beads. Her fingers trembled only slightly as she adjusted the throttle. From the ground, Hank Sullivan watched her from behind sunglasses, heart pounding. His arms were crossed, but his shoulders were tight, not with fear, but with awe. He could still see her as she was that first night. Soaked. Silent. Lost. Now she was co-piloting an aircraft with the calm of someone who knew what it meant to fall and choose to rise anyway. Beside him, Daisy stood on tiptoes, holding binoculars. "She looks like a superhero," Daisy said. "She is," Hank replied. The Sky Song Center had started small, an idea scribbled on a napkin during a late-night conversation between Hank and Elise at the kitchen table. But Walter's endowment, paired with Elise's planning and Hank's tireless work ethic, had turned it into something real. They built more than a school. They built a home for lost kids to rediscover their voices. In one wing, children learned to fly. In another, they learned to sing. And in every hallway, Maisie's story lived not as a legend, but as a reminder that music and hope could meet in the most unexpected places. After her flight, Maisie landed the plane smoothly, guided it to the hangar, and leapt down the ladder steps with flushed cheeks and a grin that made Hank's chest ache. "I didn't crash," she said breathlessly. "You soared," Hank said, wrapping her in a bear hug. Elise walked over with a clipboard, feigning sternness. "Your instructor says you were 5 degrees off during final approach." Maisie blinked. "I'll fix it." Elise smiled. "You already did." Daisy ran up and jumped on Maisie's back, nearly knocking her over. "Next time I'm flying with you," Maisie laughed. "You'll be my co-pilot when we take this show international." They all laughed, but they believed it too. Because here, nothing seemed impossible anymore. That evening, Hank stood at the edge of the runway alone. The grass swayed gently. The sky shifted from pale gold to the kind of deep blue that promised stars. The hangar lights behind him glowed warm. He was no longer the man who kept to himself, patching leaks and hiding in his grief. He was the co-director of something bigger than himself. He was a father to 2 girls, one born of blood, one born of choice. And he had kept his promise. He pulled a folded sheet of notebook paper from his back pocket. The edges were worn, the ink faded. "Don't give up. I'm still singing." He traced the words with his thumb. He hadn't given up. And Maisie. She hadn't just kept singing. She'd taught others how to begin. Later that night, after dinner and dishes and Daisy's loud bedtime storytelling, Hank stepped into the music room. Maisie sat at the piano, the light from a single lamp casting soft shadows across her face. She was older now, taller, more composed, but still Maisie. Still the girl with fire and melody in her bones. She was writing something notes on a sheet of staff paper lyrics in the margins. "What are you working on?" Hank asked. She looked up. "A song for Walter." He nodded. "Want to play it?" "Not yet. It's not finished." "Neither was he," Hank said gently. "But he still gave us everything." Maisie smiled. Then she closed the notebook. "I've been thinking," she said, "about my real story. Not the tabloid version, not the fairy tale. The truth." Hank sat beside her. "And what's the truth?" Maisie thought for a long moment. "That I was lost. And then I was found. Not by money or miracles, but by a man who showed up and didn't leave." Hank's throat tightened. "You gave me more than a home," she added. "You gave me back my voice." He reached over and took her hand. "No, kid," he said softly. "You gave it back to all of us." Outside, the wind stirred the trees. Daisy's music floated from down the hallway. And in that house, a house built on promise and persistence, the quiet wasn't empty. It was full. Months later, Maisie stood on a stage at the opening of a new Sky Song campus in Nashville. The crowd was small foundation partners, former foster kids, music therapists, instructors, and a few journalists who promised not to twist the story for clicks. Maisie stepped up to the microphone. She was poised, still, grounded. She told them about her first night at the hospital, about the rain, about the hallway, about a man she didn't know kneeling beside her and asking where her parents were. She told them about a whisper in the dark, "Protect her. Promise me." And how that promise became the foundation they now stood on. Then she sat at the piano and played the song she'd written for Walter Langston. It wasn't perfect, but it was pure. And in the final chord, she looked out across the audience toward Hank, Elise, and Daisy sitting in the front row. And she smiled, because sometimes when the sky falls, it doesn't end the story. It begins it. Autumn arrived gently in Missouri. The trees on the edge of the Sky Song campus turned from green to gold to fire, and the air took on that quiet crispness that made every breath feel like a beginning. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Hank Sullivan found himself walking the tree-lined path behind the main building. Leaves fell lazily, landing in small piles along the gravel, crunching softly beneath his boots. He held a small box in his hands, light wooden and worn smooth along the edges. Inside it, nothing of financial value, but everything that mattered. Photos, drawings, a faded hospital ID badge, a torn piece of notebook paper with 7 words written in careful cursive, "Don't give up. I'm still singing." He was bringing it to a special place. The Sky Song Memory Garden sat behind the music wing, where sunlight filtered through wind chimes and birdsong never seemed far away. A circle of stone benches surrounded a sculpture of a child holding a paper airplane, its wings shaped like music notes. At the base of the statue was a bronze plaque that read, "In honor of the voices that refuse to be silenced. Established by Maisie Quinn, Daisy Sullivan, and the man who kept his promise." Hank smiled as he knelt and placed the box beneath the sculpture, sliding it into the hollow designed for keepsakes. They didn't bury time capsules here. They offered them, so every child who sat there knew they weren't starting from nothing. They were standing on the shoulders of those who came before. He sat on the bench, closed his eyes, and listened. Later that evening, the house was full of motion. Daisy was racing through the hallway carrying a poster board for a school project she'd nearly forgotten. Elise was in the kitchen, sautéing something that smelled like fall apple cinnamon butter. Maisie was upstairs packing for her first outreach tour. Nashville, Denver, Minneapolis. She was leading the first traveling Sky Song workshop, bringing songwriting and storytelling into juvenile shelters and residential homes. She was 15, but carried herself like someone who'd seen both the darkest hallways and the brightest sunrises. Hank stepped inside just as she came downstairs, bag slung over one shoulder. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked. Maisie raised an eyebrow. "You're asking that now," he chuckled. "Can't help it. It's the dad reflex." Maisie crossed the room, stood in front of him, and smiled. "I'm not going alone. You're coming with me. You and Daisy. You think I'm going to do this without my co-pilot?" Hank's throat tightened. She handed him a lanyard. "Sky Song Tour, mentor and team lead." He laughed. "Mentor, huh?" Maisie grinned. "You're the one who taught me how to hold the microphone and face the wind." They left at dawn the next morning. 3 backpacks, 1 guitar, a cooler full of snacks, and miles of open road ahead. Daisy curled up in the back seat, headphones and watching clouds roll by. Maisie sat in the passenger seat with her notebook open, writing as they drove. Hank glanced over once and asked, "What are you working on?" Maisie looked up, thoughtful. "A new song," she said. "But it's kinda strange." "How so? It doesn't start with music. It starts with a promise." Hank nodded, eyes back on the road. "That sounds about right." They reached Nashville by late afternoon, checked into a modest motel, and walked the campus where the first workshop would be held. That night, Maisie stood in the small auditorium, where 25 kids sat in folding chairs, eyes cautious walls, high. She didn't talk much at first. She just pulled her notebook from her bag and placed it on the piano. Then she said, "I used to think stories were something people told you, but then I met someone who reminded me I could write mine." She paused, and sing it. She sat down and began to play. And the song she sang had no title, just verses like pages torn from a life once hidden, once afraid. About nights without beds, about voices that told her she didn't belong, about the first time someone stayed. And as her voice filled the room, one boy, maybe 10 years old, maybe 12, began to cry quietly. He wasn't sobbing, just leaking pain he hadn't known how to release. Maisie didn't stop. She sang to him, for him, with him. And somewhere between the first verse and the final note, something shifted. A story was rewritten, not just hers, theirs. After the session, Hank sat outside on a bench while Maisie met with students. Daisy was playing hopscotch on the painted concrete near the bus stop. Elise called. "How'd it go?" she asked. Hank looked up at the sky, deep blue, just like the night he first followed a song down a hospital hallway. "She's changing the world," he said. Elise was quiet for a beat. "So are you." He smiled, but didn't speak, because some things didn't need to be said to be understood. Later that night, after the girls were asleep, Hank sat by the motel window, Maisie's old notebook in his hands. He flipped to the very first page. The handwriting was shaky, scrawled in block letters. "If you're reading this, I'm still here." He closed the cover and set it beside him, and looked out at the stars. Somewhere, a child would wake up tomorrow and sing again. And somewhere else, another would write their first line. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a single dad, who once thought his story was over, would whisper to the night, "I hear you. I'm still listening." We'd love to know. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country. In the comments, we're building a beautiful global community of people who believe in kindness, healing, and the quiet strength of love. If this story moved you in any way, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support means the world and helps us continue sharing heartfelt stories that remind us all it's never too late to change a life, even your own. Thank you for spending your time with us. From our hearts to yours, thank you for watching, and thank you for still believing in good.